The true story of the Zodiac Killer is a sprawling, complex, and ultimately unresolved narrative that has captivated and horrified the public for over half a century. To tell it in its entirety, with all the details, theories, and dead ends, is to embark on a journey into a deep, dark labyrinth, where the only certainty is the brutality of the crimes and the enduring mystery of the perpetrator's identity. You have asked for a long, continuous account, so we will begin without preamble, diving directly into the foggy night of December 20th, 1968, where the known story of the Zodiac, as he would later name himself, truly begins. The story begins not with the first murder he would later claim, but with the first one that bore his unique signature of terror. It was a Friday night, 2 days before Christmas, in 1968. In Vallejo, California, a city in the North Bay region of the San Francisco Bay Area, two teenagers, 17-year-old David Arthur Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen, were on a date. David, a diligent and well-liked high school senior, had picked up Betty, a pretty and popular sophomore, and they had gone to a Christmas concert at Hogan High School. After the concert, sometime around 10:15 p.m., David drove his mother's Rambler to a known lover's lane on Lake Herman Road, a remote and poorly lit area on the outskirts of town. They parked facing east, overlooking the water pumping station. What happened next was a sudden, shocking act of violence. At approximately 11:10 p.m., a car pulled up behind them. Someone got out and approached the passenger side of the Rambler. Without any significant altercation, the person raised a gun and fired through the window. The first shot hit Betty Lou Jensen in the back. She managed to open the door and stagger out, fleeing for her life. The killer shot her 5 more times as she ran, the bullets striking her in the back and right arm. She collapsed, dead, about 28 feet from the car. David Faraday was still in the driver's seat. The killer then walked to the driver's side window, placed the muzzle of the gun against David's head, and fired a single fatal shot. A .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol was the likely weapon. A couple driving down the road discovered the gruesome scene just minutes later. The police were baffled. There was no apparent motive. Nothing was stolen. It appeared to be a senseless execution-style double murder. The investigation yielded few clues and eventually began to stagnate. It was a terrible local tragedy, but there was no reason to believe it was the beginning of anything larger. 7 months passed. The summer of 1969 arrived, and on the night of July 4th, again in Vallejo, another couple ventured to a lover's lane. This time it was at the Blue Rock Springs golf course, not far from the Lake Herman Road site. 22-year-old Darlene Elizabeth Ferrin, a waitress and mother of one, was with 19-year-old Michael Renaud Magot. Darlene was a vibrant, somewhat mysterious young woman with a wide circle of friends and a complicated personal life. Michael was a somewhat troubled young man she had recently started dating. They parked in the golf course parking lot around 11:50 p.m. Another car, described as a light-coloured, possibly white, American-made sedan, pulled in beside them, then drove off. It returned about 10 minutes later and parked directly behind Darlene's Corvair, boxing them in. A man got out, approached the passenger side of the Corvair, and shone a bright flashlight into their faces, blinding them. He then immediately opened fire with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. He shot multiple times, hitting both Darlene and Michael. Darlene was struck by several bullets and died almost instantly. Michael Magot, though critically wounded, survived. He was shot in the neck, face, and chest. As the killer walked back to his car, Magot, in agonizing pain, heard the car door shut and the engine start. But then, to his horror, the sound stopped. The killer got out again and walked back to the Corvair. He shone the flashlight inside once more, seeing Margot moaning in the passenger seat. He fired 2 more shots at point-blank range, one of which entered Margot's left cheek and lodged in his neck. Miraculously, Michael Margot survived this second volley as well. The killer then fled. At 12:40 a.m., just minutes after the shooting, an anonymous man called the Vallejo Police Department from a payphone at a gas station a few miles away. The caller, in a calm and even voice, said, "I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find the kids in a brown car. They are shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The call was traced, but by the time police arrived, the caller was long gone. This was the first communication, the first gloating, the first claim of credit. The police immediately connected this attack to the Lake Herman Road murders. They had a pattern, a surviving witness, and a mysterious caller. The investigation was now officially hunting a serial killer. Then the killer found his voice and his name. On August 1st, 1969, 3 letters arrived at 3 different Bay Area newspapers: the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. Each letter was nearly identical. They began with the now infamous declaration, "Dear editor, this is the murderer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman R&D, and the girl last 4th of July. The letters contained a wealth of information that only the killer could know, including specific details about the crimes that had not been released to the public. But the most chilling element was a complex cipher composed of strange symbols which the writer claimed contained his identity. He demanded that the cipher be printed on the front page of the newspapers. If it was not, he wrote, he would cruise sick around all weekend killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again, until I end up with 12 people over the weekend. The letters were signed with a crosshair-like symbol, and beneath it the name Zodiac. The name was born. The newspapers, after consulting with police, published the cipher. The race to decode it began immediately. Within a week, a married couple in Salinas, Donald and Betty Harden, successfully deciphered the 408-symbol cipher. It was a rambling, egotistical, and strangely punctuated message. It read, "I like killing people because I says, so much fun. ITIS, more fun than killing wild game in the forest because, man, is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. ITIS. Even better than getting your rocks off with the girl, the best part of ITIS, they. When I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all the I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or atop my collectiog of slaves. For my afterlife, Ebiori methpity." The last part was a jumble that was never satisfactorily decoded. The cipher revealed a killer with a grandiosely inflated sense of self, a belief in a mystical afterlife where his victims would be his slaves, and a deep-seated misanthropy. It was a terrifying psychological profile. The Zodiac was not finished. Having successfully commanded the front pages, he struck again, this time in a densely populated urban setting. On September 27th, 1969, a sunny Saturday afternoon, 20-year-old Brian Calvin Hartnell and 22-year-old Cecilia Ann Shepard were picnicking on a peninsula at Lake Berryessa in Napa County. It was an idyllic, secluded spot. Around 4:30 p.m., they saw a man approaching from a distance. He was walking purposefully toward them. As he got closer, They noticed he was wearing a strange executioner-style hood with clip-on sunglasses over the eye holes. On his chest, he wore a white bib-like garment with a 3x3-inch crosshair symbol, identical to the one used in his letters, sewn onto it. He was armed with a semi-automatic pistol, later determined to be a 9mm, likely the same weapon used in the Blue Rock Springs attack. He approached them calmly and claimed he was an escaped convict from Deer Lodge, Montana, where he had killed a guard, and that he needed their car and money to get to Mexico. He had brought pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline and told them he would have to tie them up. Believing they were being robbed, Brian and Cecilia complied. After he tied them up, he surprised them by saying, "I'm going to have to stab you people." He then proceeded to savagely stab Brian Hartnell 6 times in the back. He then turned to Cecilia Shepard and stabbed her 10 times in the back and front. He then used a felt-tip pen to draw his crosshair symbol on Brian's car door, along with the dates of his attacks. Vallejo, December 20th, 2068, July 4th, 1969, Vallejo. He then walked away. Brian Hartnell, though severely wounded, survived. Cecilia Shepard clung to life for 2 days before dying in the hospital on September 29th. Before she died, she was able to give a detailed description of the attacker to the police. She described him as a heavy-set man, around 5 feet 10 inches to 6 feet 0 inches, with reddish-brown hair, wearing the bizarre hood and bib. The brazen daylight attack, the chilling costume, and the shift from shooting to stabbing demonstrated a killer who was evolving, becoming more theatrical and confident in his ability to control and terrorize. The terror escalated just 2 weeks later. On October 11th, 1969, a Saturday night, a 29-year-old cab driver named Paul Stein picked up a fare in the theater district of San Francisco. His passenger was a man who asked to be taken to Washington Street and Maple Street in the upscale Presidio Heights neighborhood. At approximately 9:55 p.m., Paul Stein pulled his taxi to the curb. As he was preparing to make change, the passenger in the back seat pressed a 9mm semi-automatic pistol to the back of his head and fired a single fatal shot. He then leaned over, took Stein's wallet and the keys to the taxi, and ripped a large section of Stein's blood-stained shirt from his body. What the killer did not know was that he had been seen. 3 teenagers in a house across the street witnessed the shooting. They saw a man with a flashlight moving around inside the taxi after the shot was fired. They immediately called the police, describing the suspect as a white male with glasses, reddish-brown hair, aged 25 to 30, and heavy set. The police dispatcher broadcast a description of the suspect, but crucially, an error was made. The initial broadcast described the suspect as a Negro male. This error would have catastrophic consequences. Just minutes after the shooting, 2 San Francisco police officers, Donald Fook and his partner, Eric Zelms, were cruising in the area. They saw a man walking purposefully east on Jackson Street. He matched the corrected description they had just received over the radio a moment earlier. The correction to white male had been issued. The man briefly looked at the police car, then continued walking, turning south onto a side street. The officers, believing he was just a pedestrian and not the killer, did not stop him. They proceeded to the crime scene, mere blocks away. They had, in all likelihood, just driven past the Zodiac Killer, who was calmly walking away from his murder. This was the closest the police would ever get to apprehending him at a crime scene. The theft of Paul Stein's shirt would soon become a central part of the Zodiac's taunting of the police. On October 13th, 1969, the San Francisco Chronicle received another letter from the Zodiac. This one was particularly audacious. It contained a piece of Paul Stein's blood-stained shirt. The letter gloated. "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington Saint and Maple Saint last night. To prove this here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt. I am the same man who did in the people in the North Bay area. The SF police could have caught me last night if they had searched the park properly instead of holding road races with their motorcycles, seeing who could make the most noise. The car drivers should have just parked their cars and sat there quietly waiting for me to come out of cover." He then made a new, terrifying threat. "School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning. Just shoot out the front tire and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out." This threat would haunt the Bay Area for years, leading to police staking out school buses and parents living in a state of constant fear. The letter also contained a new cipher, this one 340 characters long. This 340 cipher would remain unsolved for over 51 years, becoming one of the most famous unsolved codes in history. The investigation into the Zodiac Killer was one of the largest and most complex in American history. It involved dozens of police departments across Northern California, including the Vallejo Police Department, the Solano County Sheriff's Office, the Napa County Sheriff's Office, the San Francisco Police Department, and eventually the California Department of Justice. The case was a labyrinth of conflicting witness descriptions, thousands of tips, and numerous persons of interest. The composite sketches from the Blue Rock Springs and Presidio Heights incidents became the public face of the Zodiac, a heavy-set man with glasses and a possible crew cut. The surviving victims, Michael Mageau and Brian Hartnell, provided descriptions, though Mageau's was compromised by the trauma and the blinding flashlight. The physical evidence was sparse. There were partial fingerprints lifted from Paul Stein's taxi, but they could not be conclusively matched to anyone. There were ballistic matches that definitively linked the Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa. The gun was present, though not used to stab, and Paul Stein murders to the same 9mm firearm. The Lake Herman Road murders were linked by the killer's own admission, and the similar methodology, though a different caliber weapon was used. The investigation was plagued by a lack of central coordination in the early days, as police departments were often reluctant to share information. This began to change after the Stein murder, and a task force was eventually formed. One of the most promising leads came from a woman named Donna Lass. A nurse at a resort in South Lake Tahoe, she disappeared in September 1970. A postcard sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in 1971, featuring an advertisement for Forest Pines condominiums with the Zodiac's crosshair symbol and the words Sierra Club, Sought Victim 12, Peek Through the Pines, and Pass Lake Tahoe areas, was believed by some to be a Zodiac communication claiming Lass as a victim, though this was never confirmed. Over the years, the police investigated thousands of leads and named dozens of persons of interest. Among the most notable was Arthur Lee Allen. Allen was first brought to the attention of the police in 1971 by a friend who was deeply suspicious of him. Allen was a child molester who had been convicted and served time. He lived in Vallejo and worked as a schoolteacher until his conviction. He owned a Zodiac brand watch, the symbol of which was identical to the killer's crosshair. He was an avid hunter and owned weapons, including a .22 caliber pistol and a 9mm Luger. He was heavy-set and wore glasses, matching the general description. Most compellingly, he was placed in the vicinity of the Lake Berryessa attack on the day it occurred. In 1991, Michael Mageau, after being shown a photo lineup, identified Arthur Lee Allen as the man who shot him and Darlene Ferrin in 1969. Furthermore, Alan's friend's brother claimed that Alan had once confessed to him, saying, "I am the Zodiac." In 1992, a search warrant was executed on Alan's home. Investigators found a wealth of circumstantial evidence, books on codes and ciphers, a knife that could have been the Lake Berryessa weapon, and a bloody knife sheath. However, no conclusive physical evidence, such as fingerprints or DNA, was found that could definitively link him to the crimes. Arthur Lee Allen remained the prime suspect until his death in 1992. Another suspect was Rick Marshall, a man who lived near Lake Berryessa and was known to be violent. He was identified by a witness as being near the lake on the day of the attack, and he bore a resemblance to the composite sketch. However, like Allen, no concrete evidence was ever found to charge him. There were many others: Lawrence Kane, a convicted killer and sex offender; Bob Hall Starr, a man who wrote letters to newspapers claiming to be the Zodiac; and even Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was briefly considered due to his time in the Bay Area and his use of ciphers, but the timelines and methodologies did not match. The investigation stretched on for decades, consuming the lives of detectives and amateur sleuths alike. The case files grew to monumental proportions, but the elusive figure at the centre remained a ghost. The discovery of the criminal, in the sense of a definitive, universally accepted identification, has never happened. There is no closure to this story. However, in the 21st century, there have been significant breakthroughs, though they remain mired in controversy. The first major breakthrough came in December 2020. A team of private citizens, including a former American intelligence analyst named Dan Olson and his wife, along with Australian mathematician Sam Blake and software developer David Oranchak, took up the challenge of the unsolved 340-character cipher. Using modern computational power and sophisticated code-breaking techniques that were not available in 1969, the team spent years attacking the problem. They focused on a method called homophonic substitution, where multiple symbols can represent the same letter. After trying countless combinations and algorithms, they finally found a key that produced coherent English. On December 5, 2020, they announced they had solved the 340 cipher. The decoded message read, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show." Which brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because IT will send me to paradise all the sooner, because I now have enough slaves to work for me where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I am not afraid because I know that my new life, life, will be an easy one. In paradise, death. The message was another rambling, narcissistic rant, consistent with the first cipher. It did not contain his name, but it was a monumental achievement that confirmed the killer's twisted worldview and gave investigators a new, pure sample of his writing to analyze. The second, and potentially more earth-shattering breakthrough, has centered on DNA evidence. Over the years, police have attempted to extract DNA from the saliva on the envelopes and stamps of the Zodiac letters. The technology was primitive in the early days, but it has advanced dramatically. In 2002, a partial DNA profile was developed from the stamps of several letters. This profile was used to rule out several major suspects, including Arthur Lee Allen. However, the profile was not of a high enough quality to run through modern genealogical databases. In 2018, the case was reopened by the Vallejo Police Department, and new efforts were made to obtain a viable DNA profile. A San Francisco-based cold case team, led by former District Attorney investigator Michael Morford, began a private investigation. This team, and subsequently law enforcement, focused on a new technique, genetic genealogy. This is the same method that was used to identify the Golden State Killer in 2018. The process involves uploading an unknown suspect's DNA profile to public genetic genealogy databases like GEDmatch to find distant relatives, then using traditional genealogical research to build a family tree and narrow down the possible suspects. In recent years, this has led to the identification of a specific individual. A group of independent investigators, including the casebreakers, a team of retired law enforcement and journalists, publicly named a suspect in 2021, Gary Francis Post. They claimed that by using photos of Post and uncovering a cipher within the Zodiac's letters that spelled out his name, they had identified him. However, this claim was widely dismissed by law enforcement and respected Zodiac researchers due to a lack of solid evidence and questionable methodology. More credible has been the work of the Morford team and subsequent law enforcement efforts. While no official name has been released by the FBI or the Vallejo police as of my last update, multiple credible news sources, including the San Francisco Chronicle, have reported that investigators have zeroed in on a new primary suspect through genetic genealogy. The suspect is now deceased. The reporting indicates that the DNA from the Zodiac letters was successfully sequenced and uploaded to genealogical databases. A family tree was built, and after a long and painstaking process, investigators arrived at this individual. His name has not been officially released to the public, and law enforcement agencies have been tight-lipped, stating that the investigation is still active and ongoing. They caution that while DNA from the letters points to this individual, it does not conclusively prove he was the murderer. It only proves he licked the stamps and envelopes. It is possible, though considered unlikely, that he was an accomplice, or that the killer had someone else mail the letters. The physical evidence from the crimes, the fingerprints from Paul Stein's cab, does not match this suspect, which is a significant point of contention. If this suspect is indeed the Zodiac, it would mean the killer managed to avoid leaving his fingerprints at the Stein scene, or that the prints belonged to someone else entirely, such as a previous passenger. This discrepancy is a major hurdle to a definitive declaration. So, while there is a very strong candidate, a name known to investigators and journalists, the true story of the Zodiac Killer does not have a neat ending. The discovery of the criminal is, as of now, a tantalizingly close but still unproven hypothesis. The case remains officially open. The fear he instilled, the codes he created, the letters he wrote, and the lives he brutally ended continue to echo through time. A dark puzzle that may never be fully solved. A ghost that still walks the foggy streets of California's memory.